if you find that when you do dry fasting and you start having low to mid back pain, it might be indication that your kidneys are starting to be a little overly stressed, and that can cause into some more complications. Hey, what's up everybody? It is Dr. LeGrand here for another fasting video, of course, because that's what we talk about a lot on this channel. But we do talk about other health tip videos because every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we do post a video. So if you are new here and want to know more about fasting and other health tip videos, go ahead and click on the subscribe button right down below there. And also don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any other future videos. Today we're going to talk about when or who it might not be a good option to do dry fasting. I've said this before on my channel is that dry fasting is not for everybody. There is lots of benefits to dry fasting. You know, there's been even recent research about people who are pre-diabetic who do even just like an 8 to 12 plus hours of dry fasting can see that their sugar levels could go down and also lose some weight, help little benefits there. And that's, of course, the very bare minimum of dry fasting. When you're talking about intermittent dry fasting, you're fasting for 16 hours or even lower than that, you could still find some benefits. But who is it not a good option for? Or maybe should you even consider if you're dealing with certain symptoms? And that's what we're going to be discussing right now. So first off, when it comes to dry fasting, if you are completely new about this, really it's a lot of times people, what they're doing is they're doing a full 24-hour dry fast, or they might even go crazier and go longer. They might do 3+ days of dry fasting. I don't always recommend that, but some people do that as far as trying to lose significant amount of weight in a short amount of time span. Not always the best thing. You should try to look at health first then versus trying to lose weight. If you focus a lot more on health first, you'll find that the weight can start coming off. So for my first list of people who should not be considering dry fasting, let's get the obvious out of the way. First and foremost, for any kind of fasting, not even just dry fasting, is people who deal with eating disorders to begin with shouldn't be considering fasting at this point. You need to get to a healthy point where you're not having an eating disorder. So when I'm talking about eating disorders, we're talking about, people who deal with bulimia or who are anorexic or any other kind of eating disorders or have bad association with food really should not consider doing fasting. And then, of course, the other obvious is, women that are breastfeeding or pregnant should not be doing dry fasting or any kind of fasting for that matter because, they need the nutrients for their child. You don't want to be depriving nutrients for your baby that's inside you. So really, that's something you should not be even looking at this point. Another type of people that should not be considering doing dry fasting is people who are advanced diabetics. So what I mean is you're on several different medications, either type 2 or even type 1 diabetics, shouldn't consider dry fasting. Dry fasting is a lot more harsh on the body. It's more stress, especially on the kidneys, and diabetics tend to have issues with the kidneys. And if you're in the advanced stages of being diabetic, you really got to be careful here. And I would recommend you to looking at more doing intermittent fasting at first, trying to use that to start reversing your type 2 diabetes and doing water fasting. Those things you can do as long as you're working with a physician, even doing prolong fasting before you even look at doing dry fasting, because you can run into some complications. The next people who should probably not consider doing dry fasting, if you're an athlete, like when I'm talking about like an athlete, somebody that's looking for peak performance because they're a professional athlete and they're trying to, do better on their time, doing better at lifting at a particular weight, really shouldn't consider doing dry fasting like beforehand. And I want to kind of dive in a little bit of the research that I kind of found around this. And the reason why I kind of brought this up is because some athletes do dry fasting. But if you're like a professional athlete that are looking for peak performance, you probably should reconsider about dry fasting. So the research that I want to talk about is that a study stated that athletes who dry fast before an event or competition might be hypohydrated. inevitably leading to a decline in athletic performance. So they found this by looking at different athletes and doing dry fasting. Their performance wasn't what it was before, or at least how they're used to of how they're performing. And it makes sense because your body does need water when you are, doing a big performance, whether it's running or lifting weights and you're trying to perform at your highest. You do need some kind of water. You also need some electrolytes. These are all important things. So I definitely, now if you're like off season, sure, do some dry fasting, but I wouldn't do it around when you're going to be performing for a big event or something like that. The next thing, this leads into pretty much the same thing, but runners, if you are a marathon runner, thing like that, probably should not consider doing dry fasting before a big event. And I just kind of want to also dive into another research study that I looked at here. And the study said is in that one study that they looked at trained runners were observed to see the effects of dry fasting. The results indicated dreadful effects. The athletes were dehydrated and exhausted due to dry fasting. This severely damaged their performance in the long run. So again, it goes back to look at your body's physiology. If you're doing something very high intense, like a marathon, or if you're doing something lifting high intense weights, or you're performing for whether it's basketball or football, where you need to be at your peak performance, I would definitely not recommend doing dry fasting beforehand. Do it off season if you want to start doing dry fasting. Okay. The next is people who should not consider doing dry fasting is if you deal with already kidney issues. So as you know, when you dry fast, your body's going to reserve water. It has to. The body needs some kind of liquid. And so what it will do is it will reserve as much water as it can possible to not keep so you're not dehydrated. But it only can do it for so long. And while you're doing that, your kidneys are under a lot of stress. Now, if you have very healthy functioning kidneys, you could be fine doing dry fasting. But if you don't, if you tend to have a tendency to get kidney infections, or if you tend to have been told by your doctor that your kidney function is not that great, then I'd lean on the caution side. Also, if you deal with, kidney stones, if you're prevalent for more kidney stones, I would also lean on the more the caution side of even considering doing dry fasting, because people do tend to get kidney infections more so when they do dry fasting if they are more prevalent to already get kidney infections, so forth. So really be cautious about that when it comes to dry fasting. Another set of people that should probably not consider doing dry fasting at all is people who deal with degenerative conditions or degenerative disease. So what a degenerative disease is basically when your body is more in a catabolic state where it's starting to break down. So some examples of this would be people who are in the late stages of cancer. So usually when you look at cancer, when it's usually the early onset stages of cancer is what we consider more in an anabolic state where your body is a little bit more buildup because it's the cancer cells that are building up, right? And they're kind of taking over the system. But when you're in the late stages of cancer, it's already starting to really break down your body. The cancer's kind of taken over. And fasting, at least from what I've seen in the research, unless, something else comes out, but it really doesn't benefit at that point, especially dry fasting. Now, the other examples would be, of course, somebody that has osteoporosis. If you're somebody that's older and dealing with really severe osteoporosis, dry fasting might not be a good option as far as doing because, again, that's degenerative. Fasting is, in a sense, kind of catabolic, where it is kind of still breaking down things, getting rid of unnecessary things. But if you're already degenerating and you're fragile, not a good option. I would say you need to wait until you've kind of gotten that fixed, gotten your body where it isn't in such a catabolic state where it's able to, be at a point where it can handle fasting. Another example would be probably MS, but again, the research is a little gray here as far as whether dry fasting can benefit for MS or not. But just thinking MS is also another degenerative condition. Usually when I see patients that come in that have degenerative conditions, I do like to look at a lot of their body chemistry, but most cases when you have a degenerative issue, I like to first build you up, changing things in your diet before even wanting to consider doing any kind of fasting, and especially dry fasting. Some other things that you should consider if you have been doing fasting or dry fasting is also looking at certain symptoms that you might be experiencing that you should maybe not consider doing dry fasting. So what I'm talking about is one that we've already kind of discussed. If you find that when you do dry fasting and you start having low to mid back pain, it might be indication that your kidneys are starting to be a little overly stressed, and that can cause into some more complications. So you probably should not consider doing dry fasting if you're finding that you're starting to have low to mid back pain all the time. That's probably due to your kidneys. I'm not saying it is, but a lot of times it is. The other thing that you should also be concerned about some other symptoms, if you tend to be extremely fatigued all the time when you're doing dry fasting, it might be because you can't handle with not dealing with having some kind of electrolytes, right? So when you're doing water fasting, you can incorporate electrolytes. It's a little hard to do when you're doing dry fasting because you need some liquids to get some electrolytes in your system. The other thing is, of course, when you're doing dry fasting, if you have like severe headaches or severe abdominal pain, again, you should maybe not consider doing dry fasting, at least maybe at this point of time in your life, because there might be some other nutritional deficiency that could run into further complications if you don't address them now. The final last one I would say as far as a symptom is looking at your heart. So if you tend to find yourself having more heart palpitations when you are doing dry fasting, you might need to take a step back. You might be depleting yourself of certain nutrients such as magnesium or some other vital nutrients that your body needs, like calcium, stuff like that. That's why your heart might be acting up. And you just never ever want to push yourself. The main rule of thumb with dry fasting is if you find that, okay, I've already looked at all the things you've talked about, all the people, I'm not one of those candidates, but then you might be dealing with some symptoms when you're dry fasting. You might be very healthy, but if you're finding that you're starting to have these symptoms, you never want to push yourself. You don't want to overdo it because you can be pushing yourself where you might have irreversible situations where you might be pushing your body too much autophagy, where it's starting to break down cells that you don't want to be breaking down, and it could be irreversible. And you certainly don't want that. So always rule of thumb, don't ever push yourself. If you find that you're getting a lot of symptoms, then break it off. Maybe hold off from doing dry fasting for a while until your body's really adapted to do it. So I hope you guys found that beneficial. Go ahead and leave in the comment section below if there's other questions you have about people who should not do dry fasting, or maybe that you've experienced, because I know everybody in this community will really appreciate that. And as always, guys, give us a big thumbs up, share with somebody that might benefit from this video, that might be doing dry fasting that they probably shouldn't. Maybe they need to listen to this video. So go ahead and send that to them their way. And then of course, if you are new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any other future videos. And then check out these other dry fasting playlist videos right here. And then until next time, I will see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.